So, Robert, I'm interested in your view, given that you were Vice-Chancellor of Sheffield Hallam for some time.
I'm sorry?
I'm interested in your view, given that you were Vice-Chancellor of Sheffield Hallam, weren't you, for some time? I mean, you've mentioned Kathleen Stock, and that's a trans issue, but obviously academic freedom has been talked about in a number of areas in recent years.
I was rather hoping that you'd be interested in my opinion as a biologist, which seems rather more important, because I've got to say...
Well, I'm just saying, only because the issue of academic freedom isn't solely
I'm about to say something which will mean that you'll probably want to edit the programme when I finish, but basically...
Okay. Right. OK, we're all braced for it.
I will say this categorically, that you cannot change your sex. Your sex actually is there in every single cell in the body. You have a chromosomal sex, you have genetic sex, you have hormonal sex, you have all sorts of different kinds of psychological, brain sex, they're all different. And we are very confused about this, unfortunately, and regrettably, it's got into this argument that people are will now accuse me of being transphobic.
Well, obviously, there are trans people who say you absolutely can do that.
Well, unfortunately, you can't say this publicly. This is one of the big problems. Even saying this on this programme undoubtedly will result in my getting a huge amount of hate mail. It always does. But I do think it's a big issue about the attitudes. There are, of course, issues which are important about young people who are confused about their sex, but we won't go down that route here. But it does affect a whole lot of issues in schools and elsewhere in our society. Of course, we should accept people as they are. Overall, I think it's a very sad thing that we can't discuss biological science without actually getting completely caught up emotionally with something which is really completely wrong.
Well, as I say, there are people who would vehemently disagree with you, so I'm just going to make that clear. I mean, Penny, the question is, how do campuses create a space of free speech while also protecting their diverse student body? That's Grace's question.
So I think they need to, and we ought to remind ourselves why academic freedom is absolutely fundamental. It's not just because of the values that we have in this country. It's fundamental to our success as a country. Unless you have freedom of thought, plurality of thought, you can't have the creativity, the innovation that you need to move the progress of humanity fundamentally on. So as someone who has been quite vocal on trans rights, Kathleen Stock should be allowed to say these things. I feel very strongly that we need to protect academic freedom. But I think that we can also do that by, I mean, it's very clear, it's not just that she's having a debate with people. The poor woman is being hounded by people in balaclavas and is feeling unsafe. That environment cannot be tolerated, and universities, I think, need to take a very strong line. The government has tried to do things to strengthen their arm in that through legislation. But that is fundamental, and why it's so important, particularly on issues like this, which are hugely complex. You've mentioned some science, there's issues of law involved in this as well. And unless we can have these conversations, and I think that when we do and this issue becomes debated more frequently and people are less reluctant to, we'll find actually there's a massive amount of consensus and understanding out there. What we want to do is to enable people to talk about these things, to get informed about these things. And as society, we need to do that, to grapple with some of these issues which are coming to the forefront like they haven't been before.
Let's hear from the woman in the glasses.
I absolutely agree that Kathleen Stock has been treated appallingly. Her union have actually thrown her to the wolves, but I was really reassured that her Vice-Chancellor at least supported her. And I have a professional interest in this matter as well, because actually I run services that are actually for women. They're single-sex spaces, so I'm really delighted to hear Robert's view, and I don't think it's transphobic at all to talk about biology, and actually that cannot be changed. And I think that in universities, there's supposed to be a place where we're able to have critical thinking, critical thought, and it concerns me greatly that that is being eroded. It concerns me greatly that we're not able to have this discussion. And actually, there are plenty of women who are being no-platformed for simply wanting to have this discussion. So I think I'm quite appalled how Kathleen has been treated, and I think it is quite appalling that in universities we are shying away from this critical thought, frankly.
What about the woman in the blue T-shirt?
So So I'm at university, I'm on a course, and I'm really lucky enough to be on a course where we have a large range of LGBTQ plus students within our course and in the industry. I'm going to theatre. And I would feel really disgusted if anyone, a professor or another student, made someone else feel unsafe in their course, in their education. Either way, like, why should someone's freedom of speech be more protected against someone's freedom to feel safe? I don't agree with, you know, the treatment of this professor. No one should receive death threats, but, you know, there's science backing it up that, you know, people aren't necessarily born in the right body, and, you know, there is a lot of science around that, and I just think that we need to maybe have good debates, but that doesn't mean that only one side needs to be heard. We need to hear every side, and we need to make sure people feel safe in where they're working or in the course that they're on.
And the man behind you.
We've been talking for the last 10 minutes, but what did she say? What did she actually say that upset people?
Well,
or can't you say that on the programme?
No, it's not that I can't say it, but it relates to comments over a period of time. She's written a book. There have been tweets that she's written. I mean, there's a number of things that people have objected to. I mean, as I say, one thing that she has said is that trans people are trans people and they deserve to be safe, to be visible throughout society and without shame or stigma. But there are other things that she has said that have clearly upset people. For example, she shares Robert's view about biological sex being something that cannot be changed.
It can't be changed. Keir Starmer couldn't say the other week the difference between a man and a female. No, he wouldn't say that on television.
That's not... No. Trans women are women and trans men are men, and, you know, that's a point about recognising people's gender, and the law respects that, as Penny said before. You know, we're not... I don't think we are actually very good at listening to each other on this subject, and I think we also need to hear from trans people directly, because actually their experience should inform how we create, you know, a community that does listen to each other properly and does understand where other people are coming from.
Samuel?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with the point that people who are trans are not an homogenous group. And so there is an assumption that every person who is trans believes that, you know, has a particular worldview. I think freedom of speech is really important. One of the biggest challenges as a country is people operate in silos. So if you're on social media, you follow everyone that thinks like you more often than not. Your friendship circles are usually people with similar backgrounds, similar classes, similar types of education, similar work. And so the big challenge we have here is everybody is screaming, let's protect freedom of speech and let's be safe, but nobody is willing to cross the aisle and have dialogue with someone who they may not agree with. I also think that the Prime Minister was right to say that, you know, when you're having this debate, respect is key. People who are trans are also very vulnerable, more often than not. One of the things I was working on at Number 10 just before I left was the mental health white paper, which I think we managed to get published early on in the year. And some of the data that I was presented with was very alarming, I must say. And so we just have to be very respectful, but we also have to appreciate that we don't have to agree with everybody for people to feel safe. You should not just feel safe because you're around people that you agree with. You should feel safe because you should be allowed to disagree with people and still feel safe. And that's where we need to get to as a country.
I mean, with Anne, let me chat this with Anne.
It is very hard because there are competing rights here, and I think sometimes there's a desire to go around and saying, can't we all just discuss this nicely together? It's probably, no, we can't. I mean, we should certainly be polite and respectful, Alison, but that doesn't get around the fact there's fairly hard disagreements, which I think, to an extent, you're trying to fudge, and I think your party is trying to fudge. And it goes a bit like this. Robert has given a pretty strong, quite fundamental view of biological sex. A challenge to that is the rise of different feelings about gender, people being born into the wrong body, as someone said quite rightly, and that is something to be taken seriously. Clearly, trans people have rights. They must have some rights. I mean, we're in a society in which we do believe that we should be open to people living the lives that they want to lead. But there are obvious clashes here. What is an all-female space then? Who can be in it? Who can't be in it? Who can be in it on certain terms, etc.? These are arguments we are going to have. I've become a lot more curious about the difference myself between gender and sex. Fundamentally, it sort of started perhaps from Robert's position, but I do think we have questions to answer, and that protection of minorities is something good liberals, whether they're left liberals, right liberals, small L liberals like me, should be interested in. Where I think the free speech point comes in, and the lady had a really good point in provocation, just seeing you there in the middle. I'm sorry, you're probably not going to like what I say. You should feel physically safe, you should feel supported in terms of your university. But in terms of your views, no, I can't guarantee you that you will feel safe. You will feel challenged, you will feel uncomfortable. It's what happened to me when I went to university. It's what happens here at this university in Nottingham and beyond. And therefore, freedom of speech does have to underpin this argument. It's what enables us to have a better argument. But we won't always feel that our particular view is being as protected as we might like. But that is the robustness of what it means to have free speech.
I don't think the law fudges it. I think the law protects people on the basis of their gender identity, and it also makes sex-based exemptions where it's a legitimate
and they're coming under challenge, Alison, that's the point.
Yes, but that is the weighing of rights, and that's a normal process that you know that we go through. There's many conflicts in the law like that, and rights are weighed. But I just want to kind of go back to the point that you made about, of course, you will feel unsafe. I mean, firstly, to Samuel's point, like, the Prime Minister is a person who has used terms about people's identities in print that I think really ought not to have been used. And I think that's what I mean by leadership from the top on this. We all have to weigh our words.
But he's also apologised.
And let me finish. And
no, but you brought it up, so he's not here to defend himself, and he also apologised.
So when we say we all have to weigh our words, that is what I mean, because yes, of course, your opinions should be challenged. But this country is one in which there is a history of people being treated differently on the basis of their identity, whether that is their gender, whether they're from a working class background or not. And so we have to recognise that as a truth about our country, that people are treated differently, and somehow that has got to change. And it's got to be equal respect, not just saying, well, everybody, has to put up with the rough and tumble of argument. Okay, but let me argue on the basis of my ideas. Don't look down upon me on the basis of my identity, which has gone on in this country for far too long.
The man there in the blue sweater.
I think, and this is somebody who works in universities, I think the crux of the issue here is, and I take Samuel's point, for example, about social media and sort of polarised views, but I think the crux of this issue really is anybody who works in education or higher education settings, the key part of the role is to appreciate students' diversities and create inclusive environments and make people safe. So I think that's the issue. But the conflict within that is that universities are a place where ideas and different thoughts are appreciated as well. So I think that's the real conflict here, is the person's role who is really employed to make their students feel safe. That's the key to it.
Can I just quickly say, peace is not the absence of conflict, right? And so we need to get to a place where we have enough trust and relationship in each other to have tough conversations that we might not like, but we also have to be able to believe that we all want the same thing, which is a country that is open, tolerant, free for everybody to live whichever lives they choose to. So the challenge we have is we don't have enough people who are different engaging with each other in a constructive way. And that's exactly why More in Common, Joe Cox Foundation do some fantastic work that's focused on doing exactly that, but we need more of it.
OK. I'm afraid our time is up. I'd love to bring you back in, sir, but our time is up.